Hi all, welcome back to the channel. We are now talking about PhD admissions interviews. In the last video, we discussed the 4 main things that they are looking for when they're selecting students in their PhD program. So if you haven't watched that, do check it out. So in this video, we are going to talk about my Oxford interview. This is everything I was asked, everything that I said, how they asked me the questions, how they challenged me, what they wanted to know, and how I was able to show the 4 main traits that I talked about in my last video in my actual interview. And so it will help you figure out how you're actually going to convey those, and it's going to help you strategize. So if that's something you're interested in, please do keep watching. If you are enjoying these videos, I would really appreciate a comment, because that boosts engagement, and that's how YouTube actually judges the quality of a video and then decides what to recommend to other people. So I'm really trying to grow this channel this year. I want to make sure that these videos benefit as many people as possible. So if you would like to help me do that, please leave a comment, and obviously if you're not subscribed, then please do so. It's free, it makes my day, and it's great. All right, so let's jump into the video, shall we? Okay, so the way my interview worked was I went in, they had sort of divided it into 3 main sections. One was just discussing my CV and talking about my research experience. Part 2 was asking me theory-based questions about cancer research, and part 3 was experimental questions. But before this interview with 3 panelists, I gave a presentation which was about 6 minutes long. They made it really hard in our case. They basically invited every professor. It was an actual seminar room where we give our departmental presentations now, and they said to all the professors, you know, anyone who wants to come and see these PhD interview presentations can do so. So it was actually really intimidating, because there were like 15 Oxford professors in that room watching your interview presentation. And basically anyone could ask you anything they wanted afterwards. It was really, you know, intimidating. But as of now, they've stopped doing that, and you only present to your 3 panel interviewers. So when I walked in, they had already seen my presentation. They had seen that I answered their questions well. And so I think I was already on their good books, so they didn't make the interview that difficult. But I've also noticed that most of the interviews I have had have been more like discussions rather than really intimidating interviews. So really there's nothing to worry about. And yeah, I will go over my presentation and how to structure presentations, how to, you know, give a nice presentation for this kind of interview, and how to answer questions well in a separate video. So make sure you don't miss that, and do subscribe to the channel so that you get a notification when they're up. So the first thing they asked me, and there were 3 Oxford professors, and he started reading out my CV to me, and he was like, oh, okay, you know, you've got lots of research experience, and, you know, okay, what is this? Oh, you were selected to be one of 20 students for the Amgen program in Cambridge, and okay, and you learned to be in charge of your own project. Okay, that's great. So it was really quick, you know, because they've already seen it, and they didn't really ask me that much about it. They did ask me if my highest marks in the world in A-level physics was actually true, and you know, just to check that I wasn't actually lying on the CV. And I was like, yes, of course it's true. I've got a certificate, and I can send it to you afterwards if you want. And he was like, okay, you've got a certificate, you know, because they want to make sure that you're not lying on your CV, obviously. So then this other panelist asked me questions on theory, and because this was obviously a cancer research program, it was going to be about cancer. So she asked me about the hallmarks of cancer, and to list all the ones I knew. It was so embarrassing because I couldn't remember some of them, and when I was listening to my interview again, it was like, oh dear, there were so many ums and you know, being unsure and not knowing exactly what I'm saying and stuff. But you know, listening back to that makes me realize, like, okay, I must have made up for that in the remaining of the interview. So my message to convey to you is basically, don't panic if you don't start your interview right. You can make up for it, and you know, if you start panicking early on, it will affect the rest of your interview. Just relax and say, you know what, it's okay, it was just a minor little hurdle and fall. I'm gonna pick myself up, keep running, I can still win this. So when I couldn't remember the hallmarks, I kind of made a joke of it, and I was like, he said, "Oh, don't worry, it'll come to you." And I was like, "Yeah, as soon as I stop thinking about it, you know." But I did manage to list quite a few still, so they were happy. Also, don't be afraid to think during your interview. You know, I there was such a long pause when I was thinking, and I was like, oh dear, you're right. It was making me really uncomfortable to listen to it right now. But again, it's okay, right? Just be yourself. As long as you're not like freezing up, it should be fine. Then the next question was pick one of these hallmarks and talk about the therapeutic implications and how we are now trying to target these hallmarks. And so I ended up choosing angiogenesis. I didn't know a lot about it, but I think in that moment, the reason I chose it, and I'm really glad I did, is because there is a bit of a debate in the field about whether we should prevent angiogenesis to treat cancer or whether we should actually stimulate angiogenesis, right? So it's complete like two opposite things, and there was this huge debate. And the way I knew about this was through my lectures and paying attention, because your lecturers at university will be talking about their research, about, you know, what's happening in the field. So what I was doing, I showed them that I didn't just study that course and learn the textbook facts. I'm also up to date with what's going on these days, and I'm actually paying attention to current research. So that's something they wanted to see. And then I also showed them that I had an opinion on this topic, even though I wasn't researching it, but I had thought about it and formed an opinion. You know, that's something really important as a researcher. And I was like, so I'm actually on the against side, and I don't think they're going to work. And then he asked me, oh, why don't you think they're going to work? And here, what I did was I told them the biological knowledge that I had, and I mentioned, you know, specific factors, and I said, oh, it's because if you block angiogenesis, yes, the cancer might not be able to grow, but then it won't get any oxygen, so then it will actually start becoming more aggressive. And then he was like, oh, why will it become more aggressive? And I said, oh, it will become, you know, hypoxic, and it will become genomically unstable. So then he was like, oh, what is genomic instability? And why will it become more genomically unstable? And then I said, oh, through, you know, the HIF1 alpha pathway. So mention those specific things that you've learned on your course. He wanted to take it even further, and he was like, okay, explain the HIF1 alpha pathway, what happens there? And I didn't know it that much, but again, because I had a general concept, I was like, oh, you know, it's going to form these reactive oxygen species. And then I said something about the mitochondria, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, it's going to make it genomically unstable. Anyway, I was able to convey that I had studied this thing. Even though I didn't know everything, I still knew enough. So that's really important to convey. Then he asked me another one. He was like, oh, do you know what EMT is? And I was like, yes, because, and I knew this because I'd studied it in my course. So again, if you're studying a relevant undergraduate course, don't be scared. You will have come across most of these things. And so when he asked me to explain EMT, because I knew the concept well, you know, I hadn't just learned it and memorized it for an exam. I was able to then explain it really well, you know. So you have to try and be as clear as possible in these interviews, even though obviously they know the topic. Pretend as if you're explaining it to someone who doesn't know, and you want to make them understand it and grasp it well, because that shows that you've understood it and grasped it well. Then he also tried to challenge me in something. So he started off by saying, oh, what is vascular normalization? Do you know about it? And I don't think at that point I really knew what it was, but I sort of guessed, because I was like, okay, vascular vessels normalization, normal, because cancers, they stimulate abnormal vessels. And so I started talking about it in that, and I knew that if I was wrong, they would correct me, and that's fine, but it would still make it look like, okay, I made an actual educated guess. But also, it's okay to say you completely don't know. Don't randomly make things up, obviously, but if you think, you know, you can make an educated guess, then there's no harm in doing that. So then they tried to challenge me, and they said, oh, why would you want normal vessels? Isn't leaky vessels good for us, because we can then transport drugs to the cancer? And so during that time, what I did was I like I pictured it in my head. You know, that's something to do. Just be really present in the moment and try. For me, I can really understand concepts when I visualize them. And if you need to sort of like draw on paper or something, it's okay. Ask them. You know, if that's gonna help you, you can just say, oh, let me just doodle it or whatever. I think you do have a paper and pen in front of you at all times. So if that helps you think, that's great. You know, it will show them that you know how to think and you know what works for you. So, and then because we had been talking about this whole thing about hypoxia and making the cancer more aggressive, I then said no, but if there's leaky vessels, the cancer won't be getting oxygen, and it goes back to the same point we discussed earlier, where the cancer will become more hypoxic and genomically unstable and more aggressive, etc., etc. And so he was like, okay, she's able to use knowledge from what we've just discussed and relate it to the next thing, and use her own knowledge plus what we've discussed, plus new information I've given her, plus things she doesn't know, to still understand a concept and whether it would work or not work. That's really important in research because it's kind of like developing a hypothesis, and that's the process that goes into it essentially. Okay, so the next part was the experimental stuff. Remember how I said PhD students, so they want to check that you've got research skills, right? That's also why it's important to talk about your research experience really well on your personal statement. And if you haven't watched that video, I would really suggest you do. I'm gonna link it up in the bubble, because that's really the most important thing about your application, is showing them that you've got the research experience and then also being able to convey it in an interview. So what they did was they gave me a graph. It was basically a result from an experiment shown at, just data, and they wanted to see whether I can read that data and form a hypothesis and actually understand what's going on. So it was like a curve, and they were giving some cells this ionizing radiation, and they wanted to see what the effect of that was on the cells. And so it was like a survival curve on the y-axis, and then dose of radiation on the x-axis. I knew that most students are just going to describe the graph and they'll say, so as you increase the ionizing radiation dose, there are fewer cells and it's a lower survival. But because in my undergrad I had done these survival curves and I was looking at cell survival as well, there was one thing that I had really discussed a lot with my supervisor, and that was that, okay, there are fewer cells, but does that mean they're proliferating less, or does that mean they are dying more? So then I said, oh, this is what the graph shows, but you can't conclude from this whether they're proliferating less or dying more. And they were so impressed with that. They were like, oh, that's a good point. And then the other interviewer jumped in as well, and he was like, oh, that's a really good point. Nobody said that before. And then he actually wrote that down, and I was like, yes, just say more. If you have a thought, just say it, like an extra thing. Throw in a lot of little bonus things, okay? Then he went on to say, okay, now we've treated it with siRNA, which is, a standard lab procedure that we use. Again, it's nothing hi-fi, but, at undergraduate level, you will have come across a lot of experiments with siRNAs. So then he said to me, okay, describe it, what it is. And then he asked me a few questions about that, like, okay, what would be the control for this experiment? And I said, oh, scrambled RNA. Then he was like, oh, what's scrambled RNA? And why is it scrambled? And why is it a control? Things like that to really test your knowledge. And it's kind of like obvious questions that you would know. So just be clear when you're explaining that stuff. Then there were two other curves. So, they were giving the ionizing radiation, but then there were two other, basically, what do you call them? It's been so long since I've done experiments now. Conditions. there were two other conditions. They'd been treated by something and something. So they were like, okay, and then the curve had moved slightly downward. So they were like, okay, what is happening now? And then I had to be like, oh, whether it's becoming more or less sensitive. Then they also asked me, okay, what about when you compare these two different conditions? Is there a difference? And then I saw that their error bars were sort of overlapping. So I kind of just, added that onto myself. I was like, yeah, this has the same effect, but actually I don't really know if there's a difference between the two because the error bars are overlapping, and then, you know, they liked the sound of that. So if you notice, what I'm doing a lot here is I'm actually thinking out loud a lot. This is very, very crucial in Oxford interviews. They want to see your thought process. Okay, so this is one key point that you will hear in sort of every interview advice video for Oxford, at least. And then they asked me, okay, if you wanted to see whether there's an actual difference or not, what would you do further? And I was like, oh, you would try and do a statistical test. And he was like, what would you use? And I said t-test. And then he said, okay, would you what about if you wanted to compare three things? And because I'd never done that in my research, I actually didn't know. And I said that, you know, oh, I'm not sure. Would you use regression? But I'm not sure. I've never done that. And he was like, oh, you do an ANOVA. And then I quickly jumped in. I said, oh, you know, I knew about t-tests only because I've been using it in my own project, but I haven't had a statistics course in my undergraduate degree, so I haven't heard of ANOVA. I was very, you know, I tried to justify it that this is why there's a gap in my knowledge. It's because I haven't been taught it. And he was like, oh, I'm sure you'd be able to learn it, you know. So I was like, yes, by this time, you know, I've showed them that I'm able to learn new things. The final part of my interview, they wanted to hear me talk about a topic in cancer research that I found really exciting. And again, I would only be able to talk about it and convey genuine excitement if I did actually like the subject. So again, you know, if you're applying to something, make sure that you are reasonably interested in it, because they will check for that. And so he said, well, you know, except cancer immunology, because I suppose every student had heard about cancer immunology and they just wanted to talk about it just because it was like the cool hip thing to do. But they wanted to make sure that we had thought about more than just, you know, breaking news and buzzwords, and we had our own interests within cancer research beyond what the public was already talking about. So then I was like, oh, epigenetics. And I mentioned that it worked to my advantage because all three of the projects I had applied to were actually in epigenetics. Then, you know, they asked me, okay, what is epigenetics to you? And then I said, I was defining it, and I said, you know, all the modifications on DNA, and what's really exciting is that it controls gene expression. So actually, maybe it's even more important than genetics. And I was adding my own insight, and then he was like, oh yeah, that's horrible, isn't it? And then I was like, yeah, exactly, because we spent so long trying to figure out the genetic basis of cancer, and now we have to figure out all the epigenetic stuff, and it might actually be playing a greater role. You know, now we're in the dark again. And then he just started laughing, and he was like, yeah, thank you for that insight. You know, so just add your like sprinkle and your touch into your explanations. The last question they asked me was, what are your expectations of a PhD in Oxford? You know, how does it tie into your career goals? And then I said to them how, you know, I want a career in academia, and, you know, a PhD is a step to that, and that's why I'm applying. But then I said, that's not the only reason. You know, I also really enjoy the process, and I love doing research. And why I applied to Oxford was because it was a 4-year program, and that's much better, and it allows you to learn more and also contribute more significantly to a field compared to a 3-year program, say in Cambridge or whatever. And then I also said that being in this department is going to really help me because the labs are working on so many different things, so I'll be able to still get a broad idea of cancer and what's happening, and I won't be too narrowed down and, you know, without knowing anything else that's going around in the field. And you know, then it was so funny because he was like, so what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, he didn't know how to finish the sentence, and then the other interviewer started, like, she just burst out laughing. It was so funny. And then I was like, oh yeah, you know, run my own lab. And he was like, you want to be a professor, huh? And I was like, yes. And he was like, yeah, you gotta say it. And then he like wrote that down on my thing. It's so funny. Like, he was feeding me stuff to say. They were really helpful. And then the last thing was, oh, would you like to ask us anything? This is also a really important thing. Like, again, you know, to show them that you've actually been thinking about your life here as a PhD student and stuff. So I asked them about funding. I asked them, like how many intakes are there in a year? Not in this interview, but other PhD interviews. I've said, do you have any support for PhD students? What is the environment like in this department? What kind of learning opportunities are there for PhD students? Are they supported to do independent research and to follow through their own ideas? Are they supported to attend conferences? Are they encouraged to give presentations at meetings and stuff? You want to show them that not only are they vetting you, like you are also vetting this place and this department, and whether it's going to give you the best possible experience. Show them some kind of like power, like you have the power to choose or reject them as well. Okay, so I know that I've been going on for a really long time. I hope this was really helpful. The other two things we're going to talk about in terms of interview is obviously the presentation and how to make a really effective presentation, how to answer questions at the end really well, and all of the things that go around that. The other thing I will talk to you about is the third part of these interviews, which was actually to talk to a supervisor, because you had to impress not just the admissions panel, but also the supervisor who was going to take you into their particular lab. So I'm going to talk to you about those as well. I hope this was really helpful. And again, please do leave me a comment if it was, because that is how YouTube will know it was a helpful video and show it to other people. Do subscribe. I'm going to go drink lots of water because I have been talking so much. Again, take care of yourselves. Good luck with all your applications. Bye.